On March 4, 2026, when Iran moved to close the Strait of Hormuz, Tehran's leadership operated under a set of assumptions built on 40 years of historical precedent. The United States would condemn, the United Nations would debate, negotiations would begin, compromises would be reached. Iran had played this game before. They knew the rules. What they did not anticipate was that the rules had changed. Let that sink in. In the 38 days between March 4th and April 11th, 2026, the Trump administration executed what defense and policy analysts quoted by Foreign Policy, The Atlantic, and the National Interest are calling the most comprehensive, simultaneous application of military, economic, and diplomatic pressure ever directed at a single nation state in the post-Cold War era. And the key word there is simultaneous. According to a timeline reconstruction by Reuters, The Wall Street Journal, and Politico, based on interviews with more than 24 current and former officials, the operation Iran is facing right now was not designed in response to the Hormuz closure. It was designed months in advance, waiting for Iran to provide justification. The closure on March 4th did not trigger a reaction. It triggered a preloaded multi-domain campaign that hit Iran from 6 different directions within 72 hours. Iran expected a negotiation. They got a demolition. And the devastating part, the piece that changes everything, is that this is not a temporary crisis response. This is a permanent strategic reset that Iran has no clear path to reverse. But here is what almost every analysis is missing, and it explains why Iran's leadership appears to have been caught so completely off guard. This was not just about Hormuz. This was about eliminating every tool Iran has used to survive, resist, and project power for 4 decades, all at once, before Tehran could adapt to any single pressure point. Let us walk through exactly what Trump did, how it was coordinated, why Iran did not see it coming, and what it means for the regional order that is being built right now on the ruins of Iran's strategic position. Start with the speed, because speed itself was a weapon. On March 4th, Iran deployed naval mines and IRGC fast attack craft to effectively close Hormuz to commercial traffic. That happened at approximately 0600 local time, according to shipping alerts compiled by Lloyd's List and Maritime Executive. By March 7th, 72 hours later, the United States had done all of the following, and this is critical, simultaneously. First, President Trump signed an executive order, reported by CNN and the New York Times, authorizing what the White House called comprehensive interdiction operations in the Persian Gulf and adjacent waters. That order gave U.S. Central Command pre-authorization for kinetic strikes, boarding operations, and naval exclusion zones without requiring additional presidential approval for individual actions. The legal and operational groundwork was laid in a single document that bypassed the entire interagency coordination process that normally takes weeks. Second, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced in a March 7th press briefing covered by CNBC and Bloomberg what he termed financial total exclusion protocols, targeting any institution anywhere processing transactions linked to Iranian oil, Iranian banks, or entities designated as supporting IRGC activities. This was not an expansion of existing sanctions. According to analysis from the Peterson Institute for International Economics, this was a qualitatively different framework that made Iran functionally untouchable in the dollar-denominated global financial system within 48 hours of implementation. Third, Secretary of State Marco Rubio conducted back-to-back calls with counterparts in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. According to leaked diplomatic cables reported by the Washington Post and The Guardian, Rubio did not request support. He informed them of actions already in motion and offered a binary choice: coordinate with the U.S. framework or be treated as neutral parties who would receive no preferential consideration in the restructured Gulf Security Order. That is not alliance management. That is a fait accompli presented to allies. Fourth, U.S. Cyber Command, according to sources quoted by Wired and Cyberscoop, initiated what officials described as pre-planned network intrusion operations, targeting Iranian command and control systems, air defense networks, and financial infrastructure. These were not reconnaissance operations. These were offensive actions designed to degrade, disrupt, and create chaos in Iran's ability to coordinate a response. And fifth, the Pentagon announced in a statement covered by Military Times and Stars and Stripes that the USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike groups, along with the USS Bataan amphibious ready group, were already on station in the Gulf of Oman and prepared to commence operations immediately. Not deploying, already deployed. All of this, military authorization, financial exclusion, diplomatic coordination, cyber operations, and naval positioning happened within 72 hours. Think about what that means from Tehran's perspective. Iranian leadership expected a multi-week process of international consultation, UN Security Council debates, and gradual escalation that would give them time to consolidate their position, mobilize regional proxies, and establish negotiating leverage. Instead, they got a fully coordinated, pre-planned operation that was executing before they had finished their own internal crisis meetings. According to former U.S. intelligence officials quoted by NBC News and The Atlantic, intercepts of Iranian leadership communications in early March showed confusion and disbelief at the speed of the American response. Iran's strategic planning had been built on a different timeline. They were playing chess. Trump flipped the board, but the speed was just the setup. The devastation comes from what happened next, and it is something Iran has never faced before: a methodical, sequential elimination of every survival mechanism Tehran has relied on for 40 years. Let us go through them one by one because the sequencing matters. Iran's first survival mechanism, the sanctions evasion network. For decades, Iran survived Western sanctions through what analysts call a shadow fleet of tankers with disabled tracking systems, shell companies in third countries, and banks willing to quietly process transactions in non-dollar currencies. According to assessments from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the Center for a New American Security, this network allowed Iran to export between 1.5 and 2 million barrels of oil per day, even during periods of maximum pressure. The Trump administration did not try to sanction this network more heavily. They physically intercepted it. Between April 8th and April 22nd, according to data compiled by Tanker Trackers, KPLR, and Vortexa Analytics, U.S. naval forces boarded and inspected at least 23 vessels suspected of carrying Iranian crude. 14 were confirmed to be carrying sanctioned oil and were turned around. The rest were released, but the message was delivered: the digital evasion game is over. This is now a physical interdiction operation. You cannot hide from a helicopter and a boarding team. Iran's second survival mechanism, regional proxy leverage. For 40 years, Iran maintained influence across the Middle East through Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq, and Assad's forces in Syria. The implicit threat was always, pressure us too hard, and the region burns. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, Reuters, and Al Jazeera, between March 10th and April 5th, the United States conducted or directly supported 34 separate strikes on Iranian proxy positions across 4 countries. Hezbollah weapons depots in Syria, Houthi missile sites in Yemen, IRGC Quds force facilities in Iraq. Command nodes across the network. These were not retaliatory strikes responding to attacks. According to analysis from the Institute for the Study of War, these were preemptive degradation operations designed to reduce Iran's ability to activate proxies before Tehran even gave the order. The message: your proxies are not leverage. They are liabilities, and we will dismantle them faster than you can activate them. Iran's third survival mechanism, the threat of escalation dominance. The calculation was always, if things get bad enough, Iran can escalate in ways the U.S. cannot match. Ballistic missile strikes, closure of Hormuz, attacks on oil infrastructure in neighboring countries. The cost of responding would be so high that Washington would negotiate rather than fight. On April 8th, that assumption was tested when the U.S. launched 47 Tomahawk missiles at Iranian missile batteries and IRGC Navy facilities. Tehran's response options were stark: escalate with missile strikes on U.S. forces or regional partners, which would trigger a broader conflict Iran cannot win, or absorb the strikes and reveal that escalation dominance was a bluff. Iran chose the latter. According to open-source intelligence analysis from Bellingcat and the Middlebury Institute, Iran conducted 0 significant retaliatory strikes in the week following the April 8th operation. The silence was deafening. It told every regional actor that Iran's threats had been priced higher than their actual follow-through. Iran's fourth survival mechanism, international diplomatic protection, specifically from China and Russia. Tehran had reason to believe that Beijing and Moscow would provide economic support, diplomatic cover, and potentially military assistance if the U.S. pushed too hard. Here is what actually happened. On March 12th, according to reporting from the South China Morning Post and Nikkei Asia, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a call with Secretary of State Rubio. The official readout emphasized restraint and dialogue. But according to diplomatic sources quoted by Reuters, the private message was different. China would not interfere with U.S. operations as long as they remained contained to Iran and did not disrupt broader Gulf oil flows that Beijing depends on. Russia, dealing with its own challenges in Ukraine and economic constraints, issued statements of support for Iranian sovereignty but took no concrete action. According to analysis from the Carnegie Moscow Center, Russia cannot afford a confrontation with the U.S. over Iran when its own strategic interests in Syria and energy markets require avoiding escalation. Iran expected protection. They got statements. And finally, Iran's fifth survival mechanism, strategic patience, the ability to endure, absorb pressure, and wait for American political will to fracture. This worked during the Obama administration's sanctions regime. It worked during Trump's first-term maximum pressure campaign. Tehran calculated it would work again. Here is why it will not. On April 15th, during a press conference reported by Fox News, CNN, and the Associated Press, President Trump stated explicitly, "We are not leaving the Gulf. We are not negotiating until Iran's oil revenue is zero, its proxies are dismantled, and its nuclear program is fully inspected." This is not a temporary operation. This is the new permanent reality. That statement, according to analysis from the Brookings Institution and the Council on Foreign Relations, represents a fundamental departure from previous U.S. policy. Every prior pressure campaign had an implied off-ramp, change behavior, and pressure eases. Trump's framework has no off-ramp short of complete structural transformation of the Iranian regime's capabilities and regional posture. Iran's strategy of waiting out American impatience has no purchase if the American position is permanent presence and indefinite pressure. However, and this is where responsible analysis must introduce the counterargument, not everyone believes this approach is sustainable or wise. Dr. Vali Nasr, a professor at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and former State Department advisor, argued in an April 18th analysis for Foreign Affairs that maximum pressure without a negotiated path forward does not produce capitulation. It produces radicalization. He pointed to the 2018-2020 maximum pressure campaign, which failed to change Iranian behavior and actually resulted in increased uranium enrichment and more aggressive regional activities. The concern, Nasser argued, is that the current campaign is even more comprehensive and therefore even more likely to corner Iran into desperate measures, potentially including a sprint toward nuclear weapons or catastrophic asymmetric attacks. Similarly, experts at the International Crisis Group noted in an April 20th briefing that the elimination of all Iranian leverage does not necessarily produce stability. It might produce a failed state with 88 million people, significant ethnic tensions, ballistic missiles, and nuclear material. The question they pose is, what happens the day after Iran's government collapses? Who controls the weapons? Who manages the transition? History from Iraq to Libya to Syria suggests that regime collapse rarely produces the stable, moderate successor governments that pressure campaigns envision. Furthermore, China analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies have warned that the demonstration of comprehensive U.S. power projection in the Gulf is being closely studied in Beijing as a preview of what Washington might attempt regarding Taiwan. The success in Iran, they argue, might inadvertently accelerate Chinese military preparations and reduce Beijing's calculations about the costs of challenging U.S. interests. So the counterarguments are serious. The policy might corner Iran into worse behavior. It might produce state collapse and regional chaos. It might accelerate great power competition in dangerous ways. Those risks are real and substantial. The question is whether Trump and his advisors have calculated that those risks are preferable to the alternative of continued Iranian nuclear advancement and regional aggression. Now let us talk about what this means for you. Because when the United States restructures its entire posture toward a nation that sits atop 9% of the world's proven oil reserves, the economic effects travel globally. In the immediate term, the Iran operation has created contradictory pressures on oil markets. On one hand, the removal of Iranian supply, approximately 2.1 million barrels per day, has driven prices upward. Brent crude reached $130 per barrel in mid-March. On the other hand, the U.S. coordinated a massive strategic petroleum reserve release, approximately 1 million barrels per day, beginning March 10th, according to the Department of Energy, specifically designed to offset the Iranian loss. According to data from the Energy Information Administration and S&P Global Platts, as of late April, Brent is trading around $104 per barrel, elevated but significantly below panic levels. For consumers, that translates to gasoline prices averaging $3.82 per gallon nationally as of April 28th, according to AAA, compared to $3.18 in late February. That is a 20% increase, costing the average household an additional $50 per month in fuel costs. But the longer-term question is what happens when the Strategic Petroleum Reserve releases end and whether Iranian oil returns to markets at all. If the Trump administration succeeds in keeping Iranian exports at near zero indefinitely, and if global production does not increase to compensate, prices could remain structurally elevated for years. However, if Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other producers increase output to capture Iran's market share, prices could stabilize or even decline below pre-crisis levels as new supply architecture becomes established. Energy analysts at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, quoted by CNBC, have modeled both scenarios with price projections ranging from $75 to $125 per barrel by late 2027, depending on how the Iran situation resolves. There is also the inflation dimension. Energy prices feed into every sector of the economy. According to analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, a sustained $20 increase in oil prices adds approximately 0.4 percentage points to core inflation over a 12-month period. That might not sound like much, but when the Federal Reserve is trying to manage inflation targets around 2%, an additional 0.4 points is the difference between achieving the target and missing it. For anyone with debt, a mortgage, a car loan, business financing, the Iran crisis could be the factor that keeps interest rates higher for longer. Then there is the geopolitical stability question, the one that affects everything from stock market volatility to international travel costs. According to market volatility indices tracked by the Chicago Board Options Exchange, the VEX, often called the fear gauge, spiked to 34 in mid-March, its highest level since the COVID-19 pandemic. While it has since retreated to around 22, that is still significantly elevated compared to the 12 to 15 range that characterized most of 2024 and 2025. Higher volatility means retirement accounts experience larger swings. It means businesses delay investment decisions. It means the background cost of economic uncertainty rises for everyone. So here is what we do not know. We do not know whether the Trump administration can sustain this level of pressure indefinitely, or whether budget constraints, congressional opposition, or shifting political priorities will force a recalibration within months. We do not know how Iran's leadership will respond once they fully process that the old playbook no longer works. Do they capitulate? Do they lash out? Or do they pursue a third option no one has anticipated? We do not know whether U.S. allies in the Gulf will maintain unified support for the pressure campaign or whether divergent interests between Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others will create fractures that Iran can exploit. We do not know whether China will maintain its current posture of diplomatic criticism without material support for Iran, or whether Beijing will decide that propping up Tehran serves its broader interest in challenging U.S. global positioning. And we do not know what the Iranian nuclear program does over the next 90 days. According to the latest IAEA reports, Iran is perhaps 3 to 6 months from weapons-grade capability if it decides to break out. Does comprehensive pressure deter that decision or accelerate it? 3 scenarios sit before us. Scenario 1, comprehensive capitulation. Iran, recognizing that every survival mechanism has been neutralized and that the pressure is permanent rather than temporary, enters negotiations from a position of complete weakness and accepts stringent, verifiable limits on its nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and regional activities in exchange for gradual sanctions relief. This is the administration's stated objective. Scenario 2, protracted stalemate. Iran endures the pressure through a combination of remaining reserves, Chinese economic support below the threshold of U.S. response, and domestic repression. The regime does not fall, does not capitulate, but also does not effectively resist. The region enters a frozen conflict state that could last years. Scenario 3, catastrophic escalation. Iran, concluding it has nothing left to lose, pursues either nuclear breakout, major asymmetric attacks on U.S. forces, or regional infrastructure, or both. The conflict expands dramatically. None of these scenarios returns Iran to its pre-March 2026 position. That position where Tehran could credibly threaten global energy markets, maintain regional influence through proxies, and resist pressure through evasion networks is gone. Trump did not just respond to the Hormuz closure. He used it as justification to execute a pre-planned dismantlement of Iran's entire strategic toolkit. The devastation is not in any single action. It is in the comprehensive, simultaneous, permanent nature of the campaign. Iran expected to manage one pressure point at a time. They are facing 6 simultaneously, all executed faster than their decision cycle could process, with no clear end date. That is not a policy they prepared for, and the consequences of that miscalculation are still unfolding in real time. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of what Trump actually did in Hormuz, why it caught Iran completely off guard, and why the next 90 days will determine whether this becomes the template for great power competition or a cautionary tale about overreach, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because this story is moving faster than the traditional news cycle, and the next decision point could happen within days.